There are legends in college football whose names echo through time, quarterbacks who won big games, lifted trophies, and walked into immortality. And then there are the others. Quarterbacks who changed the game forever, shattered every record in front of them, dragged their teams through blood and grit to championship glory, only to have their stories wiped clean the moment the confetti hit the ground. Quarterbacks who should have been celebrated as icons, but instead were silenced. This is the story of Tommy Frazier, the quarterback who won everything, who dominated college football like few before him, and then vanished, erased from the national conversation as if his greatness never existed. How do you go 33-3 as a starter, deliver back to back national championships, engineer one of the greatest plays in college football history, a 75-yard run that left defenders scattered like broken bodies on a battlefield, and still end up forgotten? How does a man go from the mountaintop to completely disappearing from the sport he once ruled? Was it politics? Was it power? Was it fear of what he represented? Or simply a system that never intended to let him rise any further? Because after he reached the pinnacle, after he proved he was a champion on the biggest stage, the machinery of college football closed its doors, and the silence around his name wasn't an accident. Today, we pull back the curtain on what really happened to Tommy Frazier, the quarterback they silenced after he won it all. Before the trophies, before the headlines, before the stadium shook under the weight of his name, Tommy Frazier was never supposed to be the chosen one. Coming out of Palmetto, Florida, he wasn't handed anything. He wasn't the media favorite. He wasn't the polished prototype quarterback scouts drooled over. He was the kid they overlooked, the kid who wasn't supposed to rewrite history. But the moment Tommy Frazier stepped onto the campus at Nebraska, everything changed. He arrived in Lincoln in 1992, an 18-year-old true freshman thrown into a program fighting to restore its identity. Nebraska was desperate for a spark, a heartbeat, a leader willing to bleed for every yard. And while most freshmen sit quietly waiting for their moment, Frazier forced the coaching staff to look at him, not with words, but with performance that was impossible to ignore. He became the starter midway through the season and instantly transformed the Cornhuskers' offense. His command, his presence, his ability to see the field, it was clear. This wasn't a typical freshman quarterback, and he made sure the world knew it. In his first season as a starter, Frazier led Nebraska to the 1993 Orange Bowl, shocking a nation that still hadn't learned his name. He wasn't just managing games, he was taking over games, ripping apart defenses with an option attack that looked like something out of a nightmare for opponents. Defenders couldn't read him, coaches couldn't scheme him. Every snap was a threat waiting to explode. By the time most quarterbacks were still learning the playbook, Tommy Frazier was dragging an entire program back to national relevance. And yet, with everything he accomplished as a teenager, the national media barely whispered his name. They dismissed it as a system offense, a temporary phenomenon, a style of play they said would never translate beyond Saturdays. It didn't matter how much he won. It didn't matter how many teams he dismantled. It didn't matter that he was building something unstoppable. Even as he rose, forces were already preparing to bury him. Because what happened next in the years that followed would change college football forever, and it would cost Tommy Frazier everything. What followed wasn't just success, it was a takeover. As the 1994 season began, Tommy Frazier wasn't just running an offense, he was orchestrating destruction. Nebraska didn't just win games, they crushed teams, ripping them apart with a force college football hadn't seen in decades. And at the center of it all was Frazier, calm, fearless, and utterly unstoppable. During that season, Nebraska bulldozed through the competition, stacking blowout after blowout, marching relentlessly toward the national championship. Every Saturday felt like a warning shot to the rest of the country. You can game plan for him, you can try to contain him, you'll still fail. Defenses couldn't breathe because every snap from Frazier was a threat waiting to explode. If you committed to stopping the option, he'd slice you through the air. Commit to coverage, and he'd torch you on the ground, slipping through defenders like a ghost who couldn't be caught. It was domination with purpose and domination with violence. And then came the night that would echo through time, the 1995 National Championship. The stage was set. Nebraska versus Florida, speed versus power, hype versus reality. What unfolded wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Nebraska hung 62 points on Florida, leaving them gasping on the turf, stunned, humiliated, broken. And in the heart of the beating, yes, Tommy Frazier. Then came the play, the run that will live forever. A 75-yard sprint, bouncing off defender after defender after defender. 8 missed tackles, bodies flying in every direction, as if the field tilted beneath him. It was more than a touchdown, it was a declaration. You cannot kill what destiny has already crowned. When the game ended, Nebraska stood as undisputed national champions. Frazier wasn't just a star, he was the face of college football. 2 national titles, back to back glory, a legacy carved in stone. He should have walked off that field into a lifetime of celebration. He should have been king of the sport. He should have stepped into the NFL draft with every franchise prepared to throw everything they had at him. But instead, the lights went out. The applause stopped. The path forward closed like a steel door slamming shut. Because despite everything he proved, despite a career that demanded immortality, Tommy Frazier's name disappeared almost overnight. The same machine that built him into a champion was about to erase him. When the confetti settled and the champagne dried, the world expected Tommy Frazier to step into the NFL as a conquering hero. 2 national titles, the most explosive playmaker in college football, the ultimate winner. It should have been automatic. Instead, everything unraveled in an instant. During his college career, Frazier had battled life threatening blood clots, forcing him to miss games and undergo emergency treatment. It was a fight that nearly ended far more than football. Doctors warned that one wrong hit could cost him his life. Scouts whispered, executives panicked, and suddenly, the same media that praised him went silent. By draft time, the narrative flipped. They said he was a medical liability. They said his style of play wouldn't work at the next level. They said he was a system quarterback. Excuses piled up like bodies behind the line of scrimmage. Teams backed away, phones didn't ring. The NFL draft came and went, and the quarterback who dominated college football wasn't drafted at all. Think about that. A quarterback who went 33-3, a quarterback who led one of the greatest teams ever assembled, a quarterback who owned the biggest stages, a quarterback who delivered the most iconic run in championship history. And the NFL decided he wasn't worth a single pick, not one. He eventually signed briefly with the CFL, desperate to keep the dream alive. But his body betrayed him. The blood clots returned. The doctor's warning became reality. And just like that, his career was over before it even started. No farewell tour, no recognition, no justice. The silence was deafening. The sports world moved on without him, pretending his greatness had never happened. His name faded from broadcast. His story disappeared from highlight reels. The quarterback who once owned college football vanished from the national conversation, erased while the world looked the other way. But was it really just the illness? Or was it something deeper, something coordinated, something intentional? A system that decides who gets remembered and who gets buried. Because what happened next proves that the silence around Tommy Frazier was never an accident. After his playing days ended, the world expected Tommy Frazier to fade quietly into obscurity. No spotlight, no interviews, no recognition, just another forgotten name swallowed by the machinery of college football. And for a while, that's exactly what happened. Years passed without his name being mentioned alongside the greats. Analysts would debate the greatest college quarterbacks of all time, rattling off lists full of players with fewer wins, fewer championships, fewer unforgettable moments, and somehow, Tommy Frazier's name was never there. National networks pretended his era never existed. Fans who never saw him play had no idea what they missed. History books skipped entire chapters he wrote with sweat and pain. It was as if the most explosive era in Nebraska football never happened. But here's the truth they don't talk about. Frazier's legacy didn't disappear because it wasn't great enough. It disappeared because it was too great, too disruptive, too undeniable, too powerful to fit the narrative the system wanted to protect. When you dominate at that level and never get an NFL chance, you expose the cracks in the illusion that pro football is the ultimate validation of greatness. and the system hates being exposed. So instead of celebrating him, they buried him. Instead of honoring him, they silenced him. Instead of teaching his story to the next generation, they wiped it clean. Because if Tommy Frazier could be that good and still be denied the next level, then what does that say about the fairness of the sport? Fans still argue about who the GOAT of college football is. They talk Tebow, they talk Young, they talk Newton. But ask the players who were on the field. Ask the defenders who tried to tackle him. Ask the coaches who stayed awake all night trying to figure out how to stop him. They'll tell you the same thing. Tommy Frazier was the most dominant college quarterback they'd ever seen, and yet he's still waiting for the world to acknowledge it. Silence can bury a man for a while, but greatness always finds a way back to the surface. And eventually, the truth about Tommy Frazier became too big, too loud, too undeniable to keep underground. In the years that followed, something began to shift. Former players started speaking his name with reverence. Coaches who battled against him admitted there was simply no one like him. Analysts revisiting old film realized they had overlooked a force of nature. And fans, those who witnessed his dominance firsthand, refused to let the world forget. Slowly, the country remembered what it once tried to erase. Highlight tapes resurfaced, legendary runs were replayed, debates reignited about the greatest college quarterback to ever step on a field. And the statistics that critics used to ignore now scream the truth. 33-3 record, two national championships, one of the greatest college football teams ever assembled, one of the most iconic plays in sports history. The tide turned. In 2013, Tommy Frazier was finally inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame, a moment many argue should have happened decades earlier. Cheers filled the room, applause that felt less like celebration and more like justice finally catching up. But even then, the questions refused to die. How does the most dominant quarterback of his era never play a single down in the NFL? How does a champion disappear from the national spotlight overnight? How does a legend almost get erased? Those questions still burn today, and they're why his legacy matters more now than ever. Because Tommy Frazier's story is bigger than wins and trophies, it's a warning about how quickly greatness can be buried when it threatens a narrative. His legacy proves a simple truth: greatness doesn't need the NFL to be eternal, and legends don't stay silent forever. Today, when fans debate the greatest quarterbacks in college football history, most never mention Tommy Frazier's name. And yet, every metric of greatness points straight to him. He didn't just win, he transformed the game. He didn't just dominate, he rewrote the standard. He didn't just play quarterback, he weaponized it. But history has a strange habit of losing the stories that matter most. It forgets the players who didn't follow the traditional script. It buries the legends who were denied their rightful path. It silences the voices that should have echoed for generations. Tommy Frazier is a reminder of how easily a legacy can be erased and how important it is to fight for the truth. Because when you strip away the excuses, when you silence the critics, when you look past the politics, what remains is undeniable. Tommy Frazier was one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play college football, and no amount of silence can change that. His story forces us to ask the uncomfortable question: how many more legends were buried just like him? How many champions disappeared the moment they stopped being useful to the machine? Maybe the real tragedy isn't that Frazier didn't play in the NFL. Maybe the tragedy is that the world almost forgot he existed at all. Tommy Frazier's story isn't just a chapter in college football history, it's a warning, a reminder of how fast greatness can disappear when a system decides certain legends don't fit the narrative. If a quarterback who won it all can be erased, then how many more names have been buried beneath the silence? That's why this channel exists: to bring those stories back, to restore legacies the world tried to forget, to make sure the truth outlives the silence. If you believe these stories deserve the light, if you refuse to let history be rewritten, then don't just watch, join us. Hit subscribe right now, turn on notifications, and stand with us as we continue uncovering the legends they tried to erase. Because here on Old School Sundays, we don't just tell stories, we resurrect them. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.